Dr. Pompa here with my favorite biochemist, Shayne Morris. All right, look, you know, I'm making you do these videos because I want to bring them a lot of value on. And I'd have to say that, you know, most of these formulas here, these are the core cellular formulas I use in every protocol I do. But I think oftentimes we need a refresher. You know how I know that? Because I did a coaching call with my doctors, and it was on Epic, and oh my gosh, it was like, you know, it was like the first time they heard the information. So, and they were loving it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to bring you all some of this refresher.
You think it's old news, but sometimes it's not.
No,
sometimes
it's true. We need reminded. We get sucked into different things like using
new.
this product or that, and we forget about the core, right? The thing that we need to really get people well today. And by the way, you know, we have been 10 years ago. We started talking about the cellular stuff. We started using words like cellular healing and cellular. Nobody else was doing it.
Actually, 12 years ago.
12
years
2006.
Ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, it's you can't throw
Everybody
a stick,
uses those
man.
words.
Yeah, everyone's using those words.
It's common.
But you know, because we were reading the literature, this is why people aren't getting well, despite doing dietary changes. It's the cell.
It is the cell.
I mean, I coined the phrase, you have to fix the cell to get well for a reason. So let's bring some value to these products that I feel you need for every protocol and every patient I feel needs these. And I take them myself, man. I love them. Okay, so if you recall the 5 R's, right? R number 1 is removing the source. We're not going to discuss that one today, although that's really important. But let's jump right into the R number 2, which is regenerating the cell membrane. All right, look, people, let's explain a little bit about why do we want to fix the membrane. Tell them that first, and then let's talk about the uniqueness of this product.
So my most comfortable analogy for you all is your skin. That wraps your body. It gives you all the sensory, heat, cold, protects you from the elements. It has your eyes, your senses, your smell, your touch. Everything that your skin is analogous to the cell membrane. The cell membrane is what gives your cell, each and every cell, its communication to the outside world, whether it be the cell next door or the bloodstream or the chemicals coming in or the electrical impulse that comes from the brain and the cellular brain. Everything goes through the membrane. So there's this sense that we know the membrane is part of the way the cell thinks and the way the cell behaves. But we also know modern science has allowed us to look at cell membranes. We used to think of them just as a bilayer of phospholipids. Totally not true. We know that there's lipid rafts. We know that there's huge proteins that are embedded in the membrane that do transportating of things in, right? The transportation in, like GLUT receptors and things. There's the receptors that just bind hormones. There's receptors that let things in. They also get rid of the waste. There's transporters that eliminate. There are islands of antioxidants, whether you got the cholesterol and the astaxanthin, the zeaxanthin, all these crazy things going on in the membrane. It isn't just a simple envelope. It's not as simple as we thought it was. It's like our skin. It's complex with hairs on it and all sorts of crazy stuff going on the membrane. So it was clear to us that it needed a very specific formulation.
And you do, right? I mean, very specific because there is a lot going on. Look, life begins and ends on the membrane, literally. You know, and I say the life of the cell, that means your life, you know, and when we look at why people aren't getting well today, it is the membranes. Toxins drive inflammation of the membranes, the inner and outer, the mitochondrial membranes, the endoplasmic reticulum membranes. So talk a little bit about this because Vista was designed to address all of the membranes, the outer membrane, the mitochondrial membranes, the endoplasmic reticulum membranes. Explain why that's important.
And I think, and that's actually been a fun journey. When you look at Vista and you look at our detox journey, initially we were worried about the membrane because our early talks were about simple chronic issues like type 2 diabetes, right? The insulin resistance. That was our initial push to understanding the membrane, was about insulin and their receptors that bind. And when you blunt that, insulin keeps getting made, and the cell's ignoring it. You got all sorts of metabolic problems. We know what that is now. That was our first story. But then we decided, you know what, let's take this step further. We knew ahead of time, by the way, that we were concerned about every membrane. So not just the outer membrane that I've described, your skin, but there's the nuclear membrane. That's the membrane that envelops your DNA. There's the mitochondrial membrane, the 100 to 1,000 little mitochondria, little powerhouses we'll get to later. they generate their ATP. That is the currency for living. ATP is the energy of life. That is made because of a membrane. The membrane is critical in the process. So we thought, okay, we've got those covered. Then finally, for cells that are involved, especially involved in getting rid of toxins and or your waste, your metabolic waste, there's another organelle inside the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum. All of the magic that happens in terms of making things, exactly, making all your proteins and hormones, all the production, so all the manufacturing happens inside the ER. All of the getting rid of, tagging and getting rid of things during the phases of detoxification, phase 1, 2, and 3, happen in the ER. Turns out that in those cells, it's 50% of the lipids in your cell are found in the ER. So we knew this was the key to health, the key to health, because you need to protect the outer for all the communication to the world. You need to protect the DNA.
Right.
You need to protect the mitochondria, which makes energy for you, or else you're dead. And you need to make the ER happy, or you're not building things and you're not getting rid of toxins.
So, when you look at it, it's Vista 2 approaches more of the outer membrane, and there is some crossover here. Vista 1, definitely more of the inner membranes, would you say?
Yep.
And there's a unique fat in here called cardiolipin, and I think this was the first product ever to have cardiolipin in it. Tell them why this omega-6 fat is so critical in the mitochondrial membrane.
So in the mitochondria, and it's only in the mitochondria, as you mentioned, you have to create a gradient. Now, I know that's a word that most chemists use, most people don't use it, but that is a place where you have a higher concentration and a lower concentration. So if you just take a dye and drop it into water, you'll notice that there's a high concentration of that dye initially, but you let that sit for 10 minutes in the whole water, it's fully purple, let's say. We use purple dye. That's a gradient. It will go from a high concentration to a low. The membrane that exists in the mitochondria helps control that gradient. So when you have a high concentration of protons that move through an ATP ACE type generating, it's this really cool protein, won't go into that. You want to create a gradient. Why? Because the gradient of protons moving is like electricity moving down a wire.
That's how you create the
makes energy. It makes the energy to make ATP, and then ATP drives life. So that cardiolipin is critical in that membrane to help maintain a gradient. Other fats don't do that. Cardiolipin maintains the integrity of the membrane in the mitochondria to hold a gradient.
One of the things you'll notice about Vista, and by the way, because all these membranes, that's why you have, and there's liquid on the Vista 2 as well, and the pills. So, but one of the things that you'll see is fats you don't recognize. I just brought cardiolipin up, but there's many more. The focus is the omega-6 fats, because the reason that people don't feel well today, they're taking in so much adulterated, rancid, tortured omega-6 in the form of vegetable oils, seed oils, canola oil, right? And the omega-6 is the key to fixing the membranes. It is. So a lot of the focus is on the DHA or the omega-3. But I remember you sending me a study some years ago that too much omega-3, DHA, can actually kick out that cardiolipin in the mitochondrial membrane, destabilizing and affect your energy. So again, I believe too many people, taking fish oil. I wrote an article, fish oil, the dangers of fish oil. But Vista is key, because this is designed around fixing the membranes. We focused on the ratio, 4-to-1 ratio of 6 to 3, because you still need 3. But we focused on that ratio. We focused on certain fats and protein. The cell membranes are 50% fat, 50% protein. Right. And speak to the herbalomic component, and then we have to move on.
So herbalomics, throughout this talk today, herbalomics are herb-based components. So they're natural components that come from herbs that help drive the decision-making process that your cell makes. And we know that happens. We know that when you eat certain herbs, they turn on certain genes, or they turn on certain receptors, they bind receptors. We know that phenomenon exists. We're now studying it under the term called herbalomics. In the Vista membrane, we wanted to pick the herbs that drove those decisions to make a more robust membrane in those different areas, whether they be the nucleus, the ER, or the mitochondria, or in the envelope. So all 4 areas, so to speak. And so we chose herbalomics. A lot of the herbalomics you'll notice in there happen to be herbs that actually embed themselves in the membrane, right? They're lipid-loving herbs, and so, or herbal components. And we know that when they embed themselves in the membrane, they actually offer up stability. They offer up an antioxidant effect. They create stability to maintain. When you oxidize membranes, as you mentioned, if you eat oxidized fat, you're starting off badly. But you can also oxidize it inside your body through oxidative processes, especially mitochondria. So a lot of the herbalomics are there to stabilize the membrane so that when it's working, you're not eroding the membrane while you're trying to live.
So certain peptides, fats, ratios in the herbalomic component. I mean, obviously in approaching all of membranes, I'm telling you, every one of my protocols have that in it, and it have this in it as well. Our number 3 is restoring cellular energy. You know, why is this necessary?
Yeah, when we mentioned the membranes, one of the things you keep hearing us say, and hopefully you guys know this, but mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse. It is what supplies every living cell in your body energy. And the more robust you are, the more athletic you are, you might have 10,000 mitochondria in your cell.
Athletes have more than sick people.
They do.
Well, no, athletes have more than the average person. Sick people have less than the average person.
So the more mitochondria you have, the more healthy you can be, because you can make more ATP from your resources, whether it be from the fat or the carbs or from a combination of things. You have the resources in mitochondria to make. Mitochondria not only drive the health of the cell through creating ATP, but there's also one of the triggers. If you have unhealthy mitochondria, there's a lot of issues that we call mitochondrial dysfunction. They lead to a lot of issues from a health standpoint.
Oh yeah, even simple brain fog, inability to lose weight, you know, controlling appetite.
Myalgias, and fatigue.
And
all of that can be actually linked back to mitochondria. So the mitochondria needed its own support, not just the membrane from Vista, but specifically all of the other aspects of the mitochondria, all the really unique enzymes in there, all the really unique pathways. So one of the things about being inside the cell from a biochemist standpoint is we think of the things that go on inside the cell as a pathway or as a series of steps that have to happen, whether it's making a hormone, whether it's metabolizing a compound, whether it's turning on the DNA and making a protein. Those are all pathways to describe them. This we designed around sustaining, supporting the function and the activity of the mitochondria, as well as biogenesis of new mitochondria.
That really makes this product unique, because instead of just putting wood on the fire, you actually are making more factories, more mitochondria. So we're trying to get to where the athlete is, and that's what this does. So yeah, say a word about that. I mean, why does it do that? I mean, there's a few other aspects that I think are amazing.
Yeah, the biogenesis, and again, there's a few compounds in here that drive. They tell the cell, hey, make more mitochondria because we want to make more ATP. And there's no downside to that, right? So if you make more mitochondria, you in general are healthier. Now there are some exceptions. If you're just trying to take energy and you're not addressing your health as a whole, you could be making bad mitochondria. You got to look at the bigger picture, which is why we're here today. But that is one formula that we've designed everything in, from maintaining healthy to making more mitochondria, so that you can create more ATP, which drives everything. ATP is necessary for everything.
That's why it's in all my protocols, you know. And again, typically even the first month, I will double dose the Vista and oftentimes double dose this, because you need that energy. Nothing works without it. And you're very sensitive people and patients. They're typically just lacking that ATP. You know, and most of the dysfunction today with people is at the mitochondria. So this has to be at the core. That's why these are the core cellulars. All right, core. Our number 4 is reducing inflammation. And gosh, I remember when we got on the conversation about cellular inflammation and chronic inflammation cycles, one of which is the no-ono cycle. I was studying Martin Pall's work. He was one of the forerunners on this, if not the forerunner. And your background was cellular work, right? So you resonated right to it. This formula, there is no other formula like it out there, bar none. I mean, look, you have to understand what this no-ono cycle is, and I don't want to give you all the biochemistry, but just imagine this. It is a self-perpetuating inflammation cycle that toxins can create and other, cellular issues. But if we don't break the cycle, it seems like nothing we do as practitioners works. It's like, it's just, you're not getting anywhere. Even low ATP can actually feed back into this inflammation cycle. So just kind of explain the cycle, just very briefly, why it's problematic and where it can go wrong.
So the central feature of this cycle is the nitric oxide synthase. And you think, wow, that's one enzyme in the body. it is a very important enzyme. It creates a hormone called nitric oxide. Although it's a simple molecule, it is a hormone. It turns on a number of processes. And probably the most evident is that it vasodilates your body. So when you have a lot of nitric oxide being produced, you're creating a vasodilation, which gets blood everywhere. It gets blood to the muscle, gets blood to the brain, which is why I think early on, people looking into this cycle were athletic people, were people trying to drive muscle growth and performance. And they were discovering that there was some side effects that were starting to occur. And then once we looked at Martin Pall was looking at those and saying, wait a second, it seems to be implicated in some other pathologies. Whoa, the nitric oxide synthase is now implicated in a number of pathological states. We better pay attention. So we did, and we said, well, what could be the role that it's playing? And we know for a fact that every enzyme, the best way to help your enzyme is through nutrition.
Yeah.
Not through drugs, not through any other intervention, because now we're talking inside the cell, and how do you get into the cell? Using components from plants or components from foods and so on. Nutrition, herbalomic, to get into that enzyme. So we did. We took a really hard look at that pathway. Again, what does the Ono cycle look like? Well, a properly functioning cycle creates nitric oxide. You're happy, you can vasodilate when you want.
Very
you
important.
don't. Yeah, you're good. You're a good place. It's turning on. It's turning on genes, turning off genes. It's all good. But quite often, that no-ono cycle is disrupted by exogenous toxins, xenotoxins, or metabolic toxins, or lack of nutrition. Like you mentioned, if you don't have enough nutrition and you try to push that cycle, you're going to derail it, and that's what's called the no-ono cycle. So you make something called peroxynitrate. Peroxynitrate, on low quantities, is an antioxidant, or excuse me, an oxidative compound that you might need.
Molecule.
Yeah, it's redox. So you might need it to fight off something, an infection or something. But when it's turned on and it's left on, now you're generating all these free radicals. You're damaging your mitochondria first, your DNA second, the cell last. You're coming apart, which is why you have these other etiologies. We looked at that entire pathway and said, okay, there's herbs that absolutely affect the way those work, and especially the nitric oxide synthase. And we also found a compound later during our research called asymmetric dimethylarginine. Won't go into that more today, but what I can tell you is that led our research to improve this product, and we also looked at clinically at how that compound is central to the dysfunction of the no-ono cycle, and that really is something that that's a niche for us. No one else is looking as well at the DDAH. I know these are acronyms that you'll have to look up, and ADMA. I just want to throw that out to you. Hopefully you wrote it down, but these are part of the pathway that we're the forward leaders in that science. There's very few people really going down that path, and it's critical in this formula as well as in the future of making this whole thing work.
Yeah. I'll tell you, from a clinical standpoint, this is a game changer. To where you give them Epic, and all of a sudden the patient's going, okay, I don't know what you did last time, but oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Oh, and then all your other stuff starts to actually work because you broke the cycle. We'll leave it at that. Our number 5 is, for the roadmap on how you fix a cell. That's what the 5 R's is. Our number 5 is reestablishing methylation. We could talk a whole show just on this product, right?
It's a lot.
Moore's was brilliantly created because most of the methylation products on the market are addressing the active form of folate, the methyl tetrahydrofolate, or maybe methylcobalamin, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when this product was created, and I can still picture the cycle up in the lab, right? I mean, this methylation cycle, with many different places this cycle can go wrong. I think you say there's at least 20 different touch points, right? So when people are just taking folate, and they wonder why maybe they get symptoms, or maybe it's not working, it's way more complicated than that. Moore's was built around that whole cycle. Kind of explain that.
Yeah. So real quick, you guys, I know it's tough, and visually, I'm asking you guys go look at this pathway, but the methylation pathway is central to a number of other features or phenomenon, like making neurotransmitters, or essentially labeling DNA with methyl groups. So epigenetically, it turns gene on and off with methyl groups, right? That's a huge part of that. Another aspect of it is going down through the cysteine pathway, and I won't bog you down, but it's used to detox. Methylation groups can help in the detoxification
Even detox
process.
toxic estrogen.
That's right. So methylation is used in so many places in the body. We knew that it was important to have in the cellular core, and what we wanted to do more than just provide one element. So if you think of a pathway as 20 steps, as he mentioned, the folate methylcobalamin or the cobalamin folate part of that pathway is just one or two sections. So if you drive these sections and you ignore the other 18, let's say, you're really not accomplishing your full task. We looked at Morris and said, we want every step to be supported.
We've even discussed over-methylation and under-methylation, which is, kind of caught popularity there for a while, right? And, you and I both looked at that, and, I'm looking at it clinically going, oh, it just doesn't add up, right? It's like, this condition, allergies are under-methylation, certain bipolars are over, and if you do this, you do that. And I could never figure it out clinically, only to realize later that really even over-methylation could be someone who's actually under-methylation, and they react to folate or, a product because they're only addressing, as you said, maybe those first two steps without addressing the rest, and therefore they could get a negative reaction that would look like over-methylation.
Yeah.
And another thing is that oftentimes over-methylation is meaning that methyl groups are reacting in one area and more so than perhaps another area. So it's over-methylated here and under-methylated here, but ultimately it's still a methylation cycle problem. And when you address the whole cycle, that's really the answer.
And by supporting the whole cycle, I looked at those same, and I would love to say that there's some conclusive over-under. How great would that be, right?
I know, right?
The science, if the science were there, I'd be like, oh man, let's address this. But I looked at it as well, and I couldn't see. And here's why, because the body has, every cell makes the decision where to drive the methylation groups, right? Just like it does for hormones. Can it be dysregulated? Absolutely, but if you provide everything, you're giving it an opportunity to make those decisions. And I have a hard time imagining that just because I'm providing nutrition to all those steps, that it's all of a sudden going to start putting methylation groups on DNA and ignoring detoxification. I just don't see it happening. I see the body going, hey, now that we have an abundance of nutrition, now that we are looking at all these things that we have circulating in every tissue, I'm going to use some to make my neurotransmitters. I'm going to use some to detox. I'm going to use some to modulate my epigenetics. It's making those decisions. There's no way we can dictate that. That is the innate part of the cell.
Well, first of all, there's something, the methylation priority principle, that I've talked to that another gentleman made very popular. But, it's so important that it will rob methyl groups from one area just for the adaptation of survival. Meaning your first thing is to adapt to a stress, right? Fight or flight. So it'll turn on cortisol and adrenaline. It will take methyl groups from protecting the DNA. It's not as important right now. We have to survive. It'll take methyl groups from getting rid of toxic estrogen. So people that are toxic or chronically stressed in any way, physical, chemical, or emotional, they'll rob those methyl groups from getting rid of toxins, getting rid of estrogen, and a lot of those functions that are, I would say, less important survival, but ultimately down the road will kill you. So,
it's true. And on that pathway, the way that we can explain that scientifically for you really nerdy people, and I love this part, is that cycle is really designed to drive the production of something called SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine. That is, like ATP is to energy, SAMe is to methylation. That compound is used by hundreds of enzymes to methylate. Right? And that's where the priority takes place. SAMe is the key factor. When you use up SAMe because you're constantly methylating estrogen and xenotoxins in the liver, and your blood levels of SAMe lower because they're all going to this process, the rest of the body is being depleted of SAMe. And SAMe is the key to that. That's how we can understand it scientifically, that there is one molecule that we can follow called SAMe that we know that if we deplete it in one area, it's not available in other areas.
Yeah, exactly. So very complicated pathway, but this product supports the whole pathway. That's why it's different. That's why this one works and others don't. All right, well, there's the Core Cellulars. I believe this should be at the core of every one of your protocols if you're truly going to get people well today. So we love your expertise, man. So thank you for joining us, and we'll keep bringing you the info, man. You keep using the products.